When I was a Muslim, I was taught that the Quran is perfectly preserved, that this was a distinguishing feature to differentiate from other man-made or corrupted religions. What I didn't realize is when you go down the rabbit hole, things start to get a little bit crazy, like the now Yasukati trademarked holes in the narrative. The more you look, the worse it gets. You start to realize that this perfectly preserved one text is only a facade that was created by the scholars of Islam, starting with the Caliph Uthman in the 7th century, when he ordered all of the other copies of the Qurans to be burned. Thing is, it didn't quite work. You can burn papers, but memories remain. Stray copies survive. People talk and put the evidence together to see the truth. I'm going to show you a variant of the Quran that's damaging to the narrative of single text and preservation. An example that has theological significance and is not just consonantal variants in individual words or different forms of these words. This is a whole extra phrase that is inserted into the text. The relevance of this variant lies in the implications for understanding early Quranic transmission and its interpretation. Its presence challenges the notion of a single, unchanged Quranic text, showing that different versions coexisted before the text was standardized under Uthman. Most Muslims are not aware of these problems. They think everything is fine and there's only one Quran. When you show the Quran for what it is, it starts to look very man-made. The issues we see are very relatable for an oral tradition. They are not, however, relatable for a book from God. The Quran itself says it's preserved and God protected it. So if it's not preserved, it means the Quran is not from God. This is a difficult topic, but you'll definitely learn something if you watch to the end. Let's get into it. Before I begin, a friendly reminder to subscribe if you're new here. I'm uploading videos regularly on the topic of Islam and excited to share with you what I've learned throughout the years. So the verse in question is Surah Ahzab, chapter 33, verse 6. In the standard version it says, "The Prophet is more worthy of the believers than themselves, and his wives are their mothers." This verse has theological implications. Because of this verse, the wives of the Prophet are called Ummuhat al-Mu'minin, mothers of the believers. Theologically, this designation is meant to convey a special status of honor, respect, and a prohibition against marrying them after the Prophet's death. The use of this term establishes specific legal and social norms such as the prohibition of marriage to the Prophet's wives after his death. So what is the variant? The alternative reading of the Quran 33:6 includes the phrase, "and he is a father to them." Basically, we found the "Muhammad's your daddy" verse. Seriously though, the existence of this variant reading challenges traditional Islamic beliefs about the finality and completeness of the Quran as an unchanged word of God. Mainstream Islamic doctrine maintains that the Quran, as compiled under Caliph Uthman, is the correct version from God. If a phrase such as "and he is a father to them" were considered a legitimate part of the Quranic text by early communities, it raises questions about how the Quran was preserved, transmitted, and standardized. This is evidence that there were multiple readings and that early Muslim communities might have understood the Prophet's role differently. Ubay ibn Ka'b's Quran, along with other non-Uthmanic codices, were ordered to be destroyed by Uthman during the standardization of the Quranic text in the mid-7th century. Uthman commissioned a committee led by Zayd ibn Thabit to compile an official version of the Quran to unify the Muslim community's recitation and prevent disputes over differing readings. Problems were already starting. After the compilation of the Uthmanic Codex, Uthman ordered all other copies and personal codices, including those of major companions such as Ubay bin Ka'b, Abdullah ibn Masud, and others to be burned or destroyed. However, some variant readings from these earlier codices were preserved through oral tradition or in scholarly works, where they were cited for exegetical or historical purposes. While the physical copies of Ubay's Quran were destroyed, the knowledge of its contents, including its unique readings, persisted through other means. I want to emphasize that this is not the only variant that exists. There are other bigger issues too. For example, Ibn Masud felt that the first surah of the Quran, Surah Fatiha, and the last two surahs, the two quls as they're called, Surah Falak and Surah Nas, were not part of the Quran, but rather more like a prayer. If such a respected companion held a different view about what constituted the Quran, it could imply that early Muslims had varying understandings of the Quran's contents. This difference in views could suggest that the process of standardization involved decisions that were not unanimously agreed upon by all the companions. Ultimately, they went with the majority and left these three surahs in. Imagine they didn't. We would have 111 surahs instead of 114. You should know that Ibn Masud was against Uthman destroying the other versions. He felt his codex, copy of the Quran, was a correct one based on direct instruction from Muhammad. When I said this topic opens up a can of worms, I was not kidding. This is part of the whole holes in the narrative saga that Yasir Qadhi opened up, and it's backed up by evidence in Islamic texts. What's the evidence? Is this just some far-out conspiracy theory, some random ex-Muslim YouTuber just ranting on the internet about something that he has no idea about? Or is there actual evidence to back this up? There is evidence, and this is what caused Yasir Qadhi so much doubt. There is strong evidence. The variant readings of Ubay ibn Ka'b's Quran, including the phrase, "and he is a father to them," in Quran 33:6 were narrated by several early Islamic scholars, including Tabari. Tabari, a prominent Islamic historian and commentator, mentioned these variations in his famous tafsir. He documented the existence of different readings found in the codices of companions like Ubay ibn Ka'b and Abdullah ibn Masud, providing insights into the early transmission and compilation of the Quranic text. Other scholars, such as Al-Suyuti in his work Al-Itqan fil Ulum al-Quran and Ibn Abi Dawood in his Kitab al-Masahif, also reference these variant readings. These scholars cited the differences to highlight the various interpretations and textual variants that existed among the companions before the Uthmanic codification. The mention of these variants by Al-Tabari and others helps scholars understand the diversity in early Quranic readings and the subsequent efforts to standardize the text. There's another reference. This variant is also found in Al-Rabi ibn Khutaym's codex. He was a notable early Muslim figure and a tabi'i, meaning one that followed the generation after the companions. There was the Sahaba, and then there was the Tabi'un. He was a student of Abdullah ibn Masud, and he was also associated with the early Quranic recitation traditions. His codex is not as prominently discussed as Ubay or Abdullah ibn Masud's, but his early codex is an additional reference to the variant reading and gives more weight to its authenticity over and against its omission in Zayd's codex. Arthur Jeffrey was an Australian scholar known for his critical work on the textual history of the Quran. He extensively studied the early codices of the Quran and the differences in readings among various companions of the Prophet Muhammad. References to these variant readings can be found in his 1937 book, Materials for the History of the Text of the Quran, the Old Codices. Who was Ubay? Among the authorities on the Quran, other than Abdullah bin Masud, the most well-known was Ubay bin Ka'b. He became known as Sayyid al-Qura, the master of the readers. Omar himself, the second caliph of Islam, confirmed that he was in fact the best of all Muslims in the recitation of the Quran. In Bukhari 49:60s, we get another indication of just how important Ubay is. It's narrated, the Prophet said to Ubay, "Allah has ordered me recite Quran to you." Ubay said, "Did Allah mention me by name to you?" The Prophet said, "Yes. Allah has mentioned your name to me." On that, Ubay started weeping. This indicates Allah mentioned Ubay by name and told Muhammad to recite this to him. Him being singled out for this recitation highlights his prominence. He's a central character to this mess. He's not just a random person. He's very central to the situation, including Ibn Masud. In conclusion, the Quran is not from God. There's no one singular text. There's one arbitrary text that has been cobbled together by the companions, put together based on committee consensus among the companions. These companions didn't always agree, so it's anyone's guess if they got it right or wrong. Uthman realized this issue and tried to cover it up by burning them. But thankfully, evidence survived to the contrary. The existence of these variants fits perfectly with the model that the Quran is not from God and has been put together by fallible men who chose one version over another based on best effort. The sooner you know this, the sooner you can leave Islam and live life for yourself. Thanks for watching. This video was brought to you by my YouTube members and my patrons. If you like this video, please subscribe, leave a thumbs up for the algorithm, and join me on Patreon to support me in making more such videos. This is your friendly ex-Muslim, Abdullah Samir, signing out.